All right, Mar, thank you so much for joining me under, considering the time of year, always crazy conditions.
Well, thanks for inviting me. I'm really looking forward to the chat.
Um, so, so this is our first real conversation, but we met through the Digital Wellness Collective, and so I'm finishing up this certificate program, which I believe you also you mentioned in your intro that you had completed as well in the past. Can you talk about that?
Yes, so we're both in the Digital Wellness Institute certificate program, learning through, in 10 weeks, how to have a healthy relationship with technology so that we can teach others. I was one of the first to join in the first cohort, which started this summer. And I got a lot of work and decided that it was best for me to actually wait to do it in the fall. So that's why I'm one of your classmates. I think that before, in the past, I would have tried to do everything and not sleep and overwork myself. But I'm happy that I took that decision to respect myself, put myself first, and then try to do whatever I want, but always putting myself first as a priority. And that's something that I'm learning how to do, because I learned it the hard way, which is I burnt out, went way beyond my limits. So now I'm trying to educate myself on how to put myself first
It seems,
above anything in my to-do list.
it sounds like putting ourselves first is the great wisdom of 2020
Yes,
in some
especially,
form.
yeah. And especially those of us, I think, that are very passionate about our work.
Mm.
I'm a journalist, and us journalists are very passionate animals. We believe in what we do. We put as much hours as it's needed. We want the story to be out in the public. I am actually an investigative journalist, so that's even more passionate, because the issues that you normally work on are issues that the public needs to know. You're exposing things that others want to keep hidden. And what I wasn't taught much, neither at home, neither in my education, was that unless I'm well, I'm not going to be able to do the work. I always thought of myself, I had a bit of a superhero complex, I guess, or superwoman complex of I can do everything. And it doesn't matter how much I sleep. It doesn't matter what the quality of my food or how much I eat or when I eat. It doesn't matter if I don't do exercise. And the reality is it matters. I know it's very obvious for some people, but I just didn't. I don't know. It just didn't occur to me before, I guess.
I hear what you're saying, and I'm not a journalist, so I can't. I could do my best to empathize and sort of be in your shoes, but at the same time, I can take a step back and notice how we grew up in seeing journalists in that viewpoint, sort of in movies and in stories, like what's her name, Lois Lane in the Superman movies, was just nonstop. You never saw her resting or sleeping or eating or taking care of herself. Like, I feel like we, as not just as a, as here, I'm in the States, you're in Spain. I feel like it's this worldwide phenomenon of this uh, this hustle culture of, and being an investigative journalist. Like, you can't stop until it's done and it's out and it's perfect. And so um, yeah, that just really struck me as you were explaining that.
Yes, totally. And not just for everyone in the movies. Inside of the profession, we
Mm,
actually value people that are connected all the time.
yes.
The ideal image of a journalist is this person that wakes up and puts up the radio and starts listening to the news right out of bed, or even from bed, that is connected to the phone and connected all the time, from the beginning until the end. And there's this idea in journalism that being a journalist equals being connected all the time. Being a journalist equals being stressed out. And I do believe that we need to challenge those assumptions. And that's one of the things I'm trying to do now. I burnt out after a period of prolonged stress. So I had a lot of stress for many, many years, especially in the year where I was the head of the data and technology team that coordinated the Panama Papers, the largest leak in journalism history, and one of the largest collaborations in journalism history. And I was hyper connected then because we were dealing with about 400 journalists from all over the world. So imagine no time zones, the whole
Yes.
world connected and active and discovering inside this big leak all these leads. And we were all so excited. And what I did not see coming was that I was, being stressed, and I was becoming tired and tired and tired. And I did not see coming. But one day I was like, my energy was completely low,
Finished.
completely depleted. And I think that's happening. That happened to me, and it took me a while to recover from that burnout. And it's happening more and more to journalists because of those ideals of the journalist needs to be connected all the time. Journalists cannot disconnect. And that's why right now I'm trying to challenge those assumptions with different initiatives. And one of them is actually a course an initiative I co-founded called the Self-Investigation, which is a stress management program and digital wellness program for journalists, where we teach journalists how to deal with stress, how to deal with technology in a healthier way. And at the same time, we challenge those assumptions. It is okay if you put boundaries. It is okay if you say no. It is okay if you just take a small break to breathe. And I think that we've already done 3 courses for journalists. We've trained almost 300 journalists already. We started after the COVID outbreak. So we started this summer, actually. And the reality is that it is pretty innovative in journalism to say, hey, take a break, which, it sounds funny, ironic, and sad at the same time. But really, like, my main message is, hey, journalist, you can take a break. It's okay. It's okay. It's important. One of the mantras that we repeat to journalists is, you are as important as your work.
That sounds very profound, especially in this particular moment in time. I have so many questions to ask about. First of all, the Panama Papers, because I feel like right now at the end of 2020, and I'd say mostly Americans, but I imagine also the rest of the world, we've been living under 4 years of this administration, and the barrage of tweets and the oftentimes, the trauma induced from all the everything that has transpired up until this point. I imagine that people by now kind of forgot about the Panama Papers, because it was 4 or 5 years ago when it was released in one sort of seemingly in this one climactic moment. And I want to ask you what so you said you were head of data mining for the Panama Papers. And for people who don't know, the Panama Papers was like a several thousand document.
Millions.
Several million.
11.5 million.
Thank you for correcting me. 11.5 million document leak, constituting around 2.5 terabytes
Exactly.
of data, and basically implicating many people across borders in sort of tax evasion, committing fraud, et cetera, et cetera. Not just people, but I imagine also government heads as well. What were the implications that you found, having been part of that? What were the implications of the release of that?
For me, the Panama Papers is a historical project for many reasons. At a professional level, so from a journalistic perspective, it was one of the first times where the world saw the power of collaboration. We worked together, about 400 journalists, for a year in secret. We had done this model before at the organization I worked for, the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. Actually, ICIJ had been doing this for almost 20 years at that point. However, with the Panama Papers, it was so global and so worldwide, more than 100 media organizations publishing at the same time, that everybody were like, wow, this is the power of collaboration. So one of the main things I remember about that project is what we can achieve if we work with each other. And this is applicable to journalism, but it's applicable to many, many, many other fields. And we worked for more than 100 different companies and still were able to join forces to try to make sense of a very complex topic. So I think that's one of the interesting things about the Panama Papers. From a content perspective, we had access to the secrets of millions of people, and those secrets exposed how the rich and the powerful were hiding in tax havens, in some cases to just hide their fortunes from loved ones, in other cases to hide them from the tax authorities and not pay taxes. And that has a great implication in the inequality that we have in today's world. And in some other cases, there were criminals in those documents that were using tax havens to trade with weapons, to do terrorism, etc., etc. And I think that that's basically what we were able was to put this spotlight on this parallel economy that was being used in the world, but we didn't know much about, because tax havens sell secrecy. So that was interesting to get, like a vision into this secret market. And we were able to expose it, and that led to legislation being changed, that led to investigations happening at a criminal level, for example, in the US, at many other levels, that led to taxes being recovered and then being used in education, in healthcare, in different countries. And that also led to many other, what's the word in English? Many other things. Let me just use the word things, like high-profile resignations. We had the Prime Minister of Iceland resign, the Prime Minister of Pakistan resigned, a minister in Spain resigned, and by then it was not normal for a minister to resign in Spain, because the reality is that there were a lot of politicians in that league. So I would dare saying that the Panama Papers is the investigation in journalism history that has had a higher impact and more widespread impact in countries, because we had impact pretty much in every country we published, and we're talking about 80 countries.
Yeah, that sounds, because I remember reading about it, learning about it, just in now in the few years that have transpired since then. And I remember, and I can look back at it now, and as you're describing it, having the privilege to speak to someone who was also responsible for that project, for the release of it. It did feel like the world has changed now on the other side of the release of this, almost in like what's the word I would use? It's almost like I'm going to take the word information and apocalypse and put them together and say infocalypse.
I like that.
You know, in, you know, as destabilizing as that is for maybe the people who are implicated, but more importantly, that, as you mentioned, the positive, the sort of restorative aspects of of the release of that. And I, what really struck me now as you were describing it is that you were describing this parallel economy. There was almost like a parallel universe where these people and these government officials were existing, and I wouldn't say collaborating together, but just sort of coexisting in this other world, this other economy, um, that creates such a huge disparity between where they are operating and where the rest of us are operating. And it's, it feels really, just to kind of rush quickly into the present moment, it feels like a really strange moment in time right now to be living and hearing and reading about the Jeff Bezos and the Elon Musks, you know, these individuals who've amassed unbelievable fortunes in only in the midst of the pandemic, where you can't, you know, I'd say for most of us, you can't help but to consider the fact that these individuals do live in this other universe, this other economy. And I wonder how we can, I don't know, say just make peace with those facts, or, you know, there's, I don't know for sure. I feel like I'm just kind of ranting at this moment, but I feel like I'm hearing that there's some aspect of our government that wants to legislate, have more taxation for ultra wealthy people, and it seems like whatever isn't working in our government is always keeping that from happening. So, so while you say that the Panama Papers is the most important thing in investigative journalism to date, it seems like it's also part of a continuum of revealing these facts that these individuals, these government officials, just do not actually really exist, maybe economically, in the same world as we do. And how do you move forward with optimism or realism or cynicism or hope? Like, how do you move forward after that into today?
Sometimes it's difficult because the reality is we exposed a lot of things in the Panama Papers and in other investigations that we did on exposing how the tax haven economy worked, the offshore economy worked. And I think we helped make great progress to governments with legislation, progressive legislation, and we helped civil society push for some reforms. And at the same time, investigation after investigation that we did, we saw that whenever something is exposed and a loophole is being closed, another loophole is being opened. So one of the trends that we started seeing when at the end of the work that we were doing at the ICIJ on tax havens was that some of the fortunes of some of the powerful people moved their fortunes into blockchain, which is also not transparent. So as a journalist, you know, part of me was like, damn it, there's nothing we can do. There's always going to be, you know, another way out for people who want to hide their assets. And at the same time, seeing all the impact that we achieved was that what made me feel good and what made me feel hope. I believe that what journalism can bring to the world today is meaningful work that creates impact and that helps society be a better place. And journalists, after all, are people who get paid to look into what's happening and the mess that's going on in the world and make sense of that mess for other people that don't have time. Or investigative journalists need to uncover things that others want to keep hidden. So I believe there are always going to be issues, but if to expose and issues to work on, but as long as we concentrate on creating meaningful content and making sense of the world for people, I think that the work of journalists and investigative journalists is worth it. And that's why I do believe in doing work with impact. I actually have joined this year a fellowship by Acumen, which is a US-based organization. It's an impact investment company that has this fellowship to promote ethical leadership among leaders of social enterprises. And the reason why they accepted me as a journalist is because they believe that journalists can also be catalysts of change and amplifiers of change. And that's what I'm up for when I do journalistic work. Right now, I don't do journalistic work all my time, but I try to do whatever I try to do is connected with impact. The impact that I'm searching right now with my actions, be it journalistic or other type of actions, is I do believe that one of the challenges that we have ahead of us right now is that technology is reshaping how we behave as a society, how we connect with each other, and how we interact between each other and with ourselves. And that's why I'm concentrating my energy right now on creating solutions to raise awareness on how technology is changing everything and how we can use it for good.
Yeah, that is very relevant given the situation that not just journalists, but everybody seems to be dealing with right now. I imagine journalists are having a difficult time working because, as you mentioned in the beginning of this conversation, there's already a there was a pre-existing model of the exalted journalist being the one who immediately upon waking is looking for leads, pursuing, like reading the latest headlines, et cetera, et cetera. I think I read something recently that mentioned that for the most part, a lot of journalists, or excuse me, a lot of news comes from scrubbing Twitter, basically. Is that something that, am I misunderstanding that, or is that?
I haven't read that specific statistic. What I can tell you is that the majority of people share news without reading the story, just by the headline.
Yes.
That's one of the things that is concerning, because many times headlines are not accurate or are written in a way to engage the audience. And there are some media organizations that don't have very good practices on that. It's called clickbait, which is basically you do a headline that is super catchy, and regardless of whether that reflects or not what the article has. And I think that it is worrisome that we are sharing content without knowing what the contents, basically. We're sharing articles without reading it. And that speaks also about the shorter attention spans that we have. And it's very worrisome, especially in this environment of misinformation. We speak a lot about fake news. That's actually not the right term, because not everything is fake. What's more dangerous is what's half true. Half truths are always more dangerous than completely fake news. But the reality is misinformation is out there, is now being pushed at a massive scale by bots, by algorithms, by governments, that want to influence other governments or elections. And people believe what's mostly on their social media because my aunt shared it. So I trust my aunt. But what happens is my aunt doesn't read the story. So again, if my aunt shares an article and she doesn't read it, she just shared it by the headline and she's outraged. And that's really worrisome. So I believe that we're at a time where helping society raise awareness on these topics and be more aware. So I think we're in the awareness era, if I may call it, where we need to help society be more aware of what's going on, how technology is influencing the way we consume news, the way we get informed, the way we behave. That's more important than ever, because we need to cultivate this critical mind. And we have a saying in journalism: if your mother says she loves you, check it out or double check. And I think that we should apply to everything, even if it's your best friend who has a PhD that has shared something. Really put it in question. We are in an era where you cannot trust anything unless you've double checked it or you really know the source of the information is reliable. And I think that it's key to be critical. And we are in this awareness era where we need to be aware of the digital society we live in and how it works.
Very, very important. I completely agree. Speaking of awareness, I want to ask you about deepfakes. If you're familiar with deepfakes, and if you've done any investigative journalism on the topic, because it sounds like I've just recently become aware of the work of a journalist named Nina Schick, who I think is UK based, and I think her area of focus right now is on deepfakes, the rise of deepfakes, and through following her, I've just in the last month, or so, have come across really alarming points of focus where, there was a push by some aspect of our government that was trying to paint the son of the now president-elect in a negative light through content purported to be found on his laptop that was reported by a journalist named Martin Aspen, who apparently doesn't exist, is a deepfake himself. And so it turns into this like Philip K. Dick sort of narrative where if we thought articles and clickbait exists to basically just destabilize and to confuse people, what happens when images of AI, just AI driven people, I mean, they are parts of people. So like you say, that there's kernels of truth, but then they themselves, this finished product is not an actual person, but it's used as a front to push a completely BS article. Like, how do we even, this is a really heavy question. It gets really philosophical, but I wonder if you can speak to that.
Yeah, I think that something else another term that we use in journalism that I think applies here is activate your bullshit detector. And I think that's something I recommend everyone to be more critical with reality and with the news. I do think it's very important whenever you receive content from others or when some content gets to you, you need to question, what is the source? What do I know about the source? How reliable is this source? And as critical as I am sometimes of media organizations and how some media organizations lean more towards one side and some to the others, the reality is that media professionals are professionals, or journalists are professionals whose work is to fact check reality, to do work to double check, to get multiple sources, to do all this curation of reality. And I think that it's important to honor that and to recognize that work. I also think it's important to get to know how misinformation and disinformation works. I believe one of the organizations that is doing great work on this front is called First Draft, and their website is firstdraftnews.org. And they have a lot of resources on how to combat disinformation and how to get better informed. I personally don't have much knowledge on deep fakes other than, I read about them, I know what they are. So I don't like speaking about things I don't know in detail. But the effects of artificial intelligence and unethical artificial intelligence on society is one of the topics of my concern. And this is why one of the initiatives that I created, another initiative I co-funded, is an institute in Spain to promote ethical artificial intelligence and to study the impacts on society of artificial intelligence. It's called Odisea IA. IA is artificial intelligence in Spain. So basically, that's what we do there. Is we are community driven. We are a nonprofit association, and we are the hub to go to in Spain if you're concerned about ethical artificial intelligence. And we have different areas of work, and some of the conversations that we have are around how do algorithms create bias? How do algorithms create societies or unfair societies? And how can we prevent that from happening? And we still haven't started anything on deep fakes, but we have had some conversations already on the ethical aspects of artificial intelligence. And that goes beyond deep fakes. Deep fakes is like what people are more scared about because it's what's more visual. But I am as scared I'm kind of like concerned about that. And at the same time, I'm also concerned about algorithms in government for predictive policing that are actually using bad data and replicating racism patterns. I'm concerned about face recognition that has racial bias. I'm concerned about how algorithms are being used sometimes to decide who gets governmental funding, and that can have an impact. Or judicial work that is using algorithms, but is sometimes tainted and biased. So I'm also concerned about that. It's not so highly visible and at the same time has very deep implications too.
Absolutely. There's so much, there's definitely so much to inquire within, that for most of us who are beyond stressed out, approaching a year, living in a pandemic, some of us with parents with kids, others not, others working from home, others, that our discernment, or a bandwidth for discernment and for critical thinking has been chipped away, which is scary.
And I guess that's why it's so important, the work that the Digital Wellness Institute and Digital Wellness Collective are doing. And I guess that's probably why we are doing this course, and why we are becoming experts in digital wellness. I believe that in this crazy world that we live in, where technology has so much influence on everything we do, we really need to rethink how to have a healthier relationship with technology and how to have a healthier relationship with ourselves and our work, so that we can have some clarity of mind. We cannot afford to have individuals that are burnt out, that have cloudy minds, because the world is very complex right now, dealing with very complex topics. We need as much clarity of mind as possible, and that's what we all should work on. And part of that work should be done with ourselves on redefining our relationship with technology.
Yeah, and I really appreciate not only you're taking the time for this conversation, but to just in the work that you have done, the work you continue to do to help other journalists, and wherever you will be taking that, you know, as we move on. I want to ask you, before we put a bookmark in this conversation, just if you could maybe speak just to I wanted to go ask you about, what you've been observing about the U.S. from across the ocean, but I think I want to save that for the next conversation because it's still so triggering. Because I haven't watched, what was released this week, but nor do I plan to. But I want to ask you just about the pandemic for the last few minutes, just how that's going for you in Spain. What do you how's that affected you personally, professionally, and what you see moving forward?
To me, it's been very interesting because when the pandemic hit here, which was in March, and we had very strict confinement, a very strict lockdown. We were not able to leave our houses pretty much for 100 days. So it was more strict than what you guys had in the US. Everybody was overwhelmed, or a lot of the people I knew, or what the news were talking about, was people were overwhelmed because they had to work remotely, because they were overwhelmed by uncertainty. And I was not overwhelmed by neither of those two things because I've been working remotely for 10 years already, and have had to redefine my relationship with technology because I burnt out because I didn't do it well before. So I burnt out 3 years ago. I had to redefine my relationship with technology. So now I have a healthy relationship with technology, and I know how to establish digital boundaries. And therefore, that also helped me now because, I know how to deal with digital in a healthy way. And I was not overwhelmed by uncertainty because the past 3 years of my life have been full of uncertainty. So in some ways, I felt like, I've been preparing for this. You know how you sometimes, or at least it happens to me, sometimes you wonder, why am I doing this? Lord, why is this happening in my life? And then years later, things make sense. So now a lot of my past makes sense. Like Steve Jobs said, right? You cannot make sense moving forward. You can connect the dots looking backwards. And I feel like I've been preparing for this period of time for at least the past 10 years of my life. So I feel very comfortable in this environment where everything happens remotely and where we need to be creative on how to create meaningful connections through technology, and where we need to work using technology for everything. I feel very comfortable with this time. And also I don't mind not leaving because my apartment, because I'm like a little bit of a developer. Like I've worked many years with developers, and there was a meme going around at the beginning of the pandemic, at least here in Spain, is like when the government does lockdown and you realize that you've lived in confinement all your life. So that's how I felt. It's like, my life is not changing much. Anyway, all this to say that I feel lucky that I've been preparing for a similar situation than this for a long time. I'm very lucky and grateful that most of the people around me are healthy, and that has created a great stability in my life. And I think we live in very hard times that require creativity. There's this concept in Acumen Manifesto. There's a concept called moral imagination, which I'm paraphrasing here, but it's the concept of accepting reality as it is and imagining how it could be. And I think that it is a time to have moral imagination, borrowing from Acumen's words, to accept the parenthesis shitty parenthesis reality that we live in, and try to make the most of it and be creative. And I believe the situation is hard, and I am very sad for all the people that have lost their lives. And at the same time, I believe that we have a great opportunity as a society to create a better society out of this. So my hope is that we really make use of this opportunity. I'm not sure if next opportunity, we're going to have a second opportunity. And if we do, it's going to probably be way worse. So we should make the most of this one.
Well said. I really appreciate the groundedness and the levity with which you are sharing, regarding your experience living in this pandemic, and the resilience that you've grown, and you've learned how to adapt accordingly. I too have had many years of uncertainty, and so in this reality, it's that sort of relationship with uncertainty that I feel like I want to move forward in this realm of digital wellness to assist people in the appropriate ways. Thank you so much for this time, for this conversation. I really look forward to continuing it. Thank you for the work you do. And I look forward to having another opportunity to speak with you.
Whenever you want. We're just a Zoom call away.
Great. Thank you, Mar.
Thank you.
Have a nice evening. Bye.
Gracias.
Gracias.